So this presentation is on our next component of the SIOP model, comprehensible input. So comprehensible input is more than just showing pictures and visual clues. And we have mentioned this term a few times in throughout the course already, but this is really the information that we're providing to students throughout the course of a lesson. It involves more. So instead of just pictures and visual clues, it involves a conscious effort to make the lesson accessible through a variety of different things. Communication is made more understandable through speech that is appropriate to a student's proficiency level. So teachers enunciating and speaking more slowly, although still naturally, and then more repetition may be needed. Using appropriate speech coupled with other techniques make the content clearer for students. So we always want to use speech that's appropriate for students' proficiency levels. So speech refers to the rate of enunciation, so how we're speaking, and then the complexity of language, what we're saying. So effective teachers must adjust their rate of speech and enunciation to their students' levels of English proficiency. Likewise, students will respond accordingly, and so that's what makes it more accessible for them. So examples of student responses to the setting of a story. So these are all responses based on the WIDA levels of proficiency. And it was that students then responded to what's the question? What is the setting of the story? So if it's an entering student, a student who's just entering the language, they might just say cold day. But a beginning student would say day is cold and there's snow. A developing student would say the day is cold and there is snow. An expanding student, the day is very cold and heavy snow is falling. A bridging student, it is cold winter day and it is snowing more heavily than usual. And then a reaching student here at the end would say the unusually heavy snow on the day the story takes place causes a number of problems for the characters. So if you take a look just at the progression here and what language would be appropriate at these different proficiency levels, you can see how an entering student is giving you just basic information and not necessarily in a complete sentence. And slowly, as you work your way up to reaching, we're getting that the structure of that sentence becomes more grammatically correct. There's more descriptors in there, and it's becoming more elaborate, where they're then taking just the answer to the question and connecting it back to the story, like we see in the reaching example. It's important to carefully monitor vocabulary and sentence structure that we're using with English language learners because we want to make sure that it matches their proficiency level. Otherwise, it becomes hard for them to access the information. So there's ways that we can monitor our classroom speech. We can enunciate clearly. We can ask students to elaborate, and especially with students at the intermediate and advanced levels. If we're calling on them to elaborate, then we can then get a better idea of how we're doing with the language that we're using. We can model before asking students to produce language. So we've been studying that there are many changes in the Earth's crust. Some come quickly and others take millions of years. What is one change that comes quickly? So you've already kind of given them something to work with so that when they respond, they have that language also. Avoid idioms, particularly with beginners. So there are a lot of sayings like, let's circle back around to this. That could be very confusing. Or I'm trying to think of some other ones that, raining cats and dogs, that sort of thing. That will be very confusing for someone who is learning the language still because they're very literal. So having to then unpack an idiom is very confusing for them. Employ paraphrasing and repetition to enhance understanding, and we can also just simplify our sentence structures. So clear explanation of academic tasks is also very important, and this probably, as you're reading it, makes sense that we want to make sure that what we're asking them to do is very clear. Bailey and Pransky point out that when students are confused about a lesson's topic or activity purpose, they either become disengaged, so already we've lost them at that point, or they're frantically trying to make connections with what they already know. And then that activity of frantically trying to understand and make a connection causes them to just waste that valuable memory processing space that could be used on the task, but instead they're wasting all of this energy and all of this, memory processing on trying to just understand what they're supposed to be doing. So when a teacher isn't clear, there's more at stake than having to repeat the instructions because now they're just not going to get the information, or it can become a classroom management issue. Effective teachers present instructions in step-by-step manner, so including modeling or demonstrating. And ideally, a finished product is shown to students so that they know what the task entails. So even more than just making your directions clear, it's also really helpful if you have a finished model that you can then show students, like a student sample. You can present it to the class and they can then understand, okay, I'm working towards this. This is what I have to have at the end, which can be really helpful for an English language learner. Oral directions should always be accompanied by written ones. And now that we've talked about just oral language development and also reading in this week as well, hopefully you get that understanding, right? When we're speaking, it's so fragmented and so fleeting that it's hard for them to hold on to everything that we're asking them to do. So for an English language learner, speaking, but then also having that written copy in front of them is really, really helpful because they always have the written text that they can then go back to. Making expectations clear to students contributes to an effective and efficient classroom. So behavior problems can be the result of students not being sure what they're supposed to be doing. Also, as you take a look at these, I think that this is best practice for all students. Really, if any student, if your directions aren't clear for any student, right, this could be an issue for English speaking students as well. And even the idea of orally sharing the directions, but then also providing them a written set of directions as well is helpful, because as I'm thinking of the high school students that I teach, right, just because I've told them what to do doesn't mean they're going to remember every step. Having it written somewhere is just helpful. So I think this is really just best practices for all students, but especially helpful for our English language learners. So I have two examples here of directions that are provided by teachers, and hopefully you can kind of consider what we've discussed already and understand how one is really ideal over another. So the teacher writes on the board, review your notes from yesterday, use your notes to answer the 5 questions on the board, write your answers on your whiteboard, and complete the graphic organizer. After giving students a few minutes to review their notes with a partner, the teacher gives them a set amount of time to answer the first 5 questions. She gives them a 30-second signal and then asks the class to show me their whiteboards where they have written their answers. She can see from a glance at their boards who got it right and who needs assistance or clarification. This process continues until all 5 questions are answered. Teachers show a copy of the graphic organizer on the document reader or just presents it to the class so that they can view it also, and completes the first part with the class. So now she's modeling how to complete the first part of that organizer. Then students take the information from the 5 questions and they use that information to fill in the rest of the organizer. Students are allowed to work with a partner on completing the graphic organizer, but the teacher circulates and observes to make sure that both partners have understand the information. She asks questions and prompts to ensure understanding. So what she's written on the board, she then breaks it down and works the students through those objectives. And assesses them informally as she's observing them along the way. Example B, teacher gives an oral review of what was discussed in the story the previous day, so she's just sharing aloud. Then she asks a series of questions about characters, the story's problem, and how the problem in the story was resolved. Several students raise their hands to answer the questions. The teacher talks about the theme and the importance of recognizing a story's theme. The teacher then hands out a graphic organizer and tells the students that they have the remainder of the period to complete it using the story and the information they have talked about. So this one, I'm hoping, as you're taking a look at both of these examples, you're understanding that Nothing is written down. And aside from the students being provided a graphic organizer, she hasn't modeled anything here in this one. And so it becomes more difficult for an English language learner to remember all of the information that was just shared orally. So the fact that they've gone over so much information about the story and none of it was written down or included somewhere now makes it incredibly more difficult for them to recall all of that because it's gone. That language that was shared is now gone. And then now they're expected to complete this graphic organizer. So this one is definitely more challenging. It's a challenging class for an English language learner because there aren't that supports that were provided in the first example. So we always want to use a variety of techniques, like all of these other ideas. We want to mix it up to make the content concepts clear for our students. English language learners benefit from a wide range of supports to make the material understandable. So techniques should match the task. We should use gestures, body language, pictures, and objects to accompany speech, provide a model of the process, task, or assignment, review material for optimal learning, allow students alternative forms for expressing their understanding of information and concepts, use multimedia and other technologies in lessons, provide repeated exposure to words, concepts, and skills, use graphic organizers effectively, and audio tape text for greater comprehension. So in summary, although English learners learn in many of the same ways as fluent English-speaking students, they do require some special supports or accommodations that makes the instruction more understandable. Effective teachers constantly modulate and adjust their speech to ensure that the content is comprehensible. Concepts are taught using a variety of techniques, including modeling, gestures, hands-on activities, and demonstrations, so students can learn and understand the content material. And effective teachers provide explanations of academic tasks in ways that make clear what students are expected to accomplish and promote student success.